Okay. So my name is Leila, Dr. Leila Edwards. Probably you've read a little bit about me on the bio. It's a different bio that I use for this than I do from some of my other courses, because assertiveness is something that I've been doing for a very long time. I was first introduced to the concept of assertiveness training many years ago when I was a lecturer in a college in London. And a few of us went on this course that was for lecturers, and it was mostly women. There were a couple of men also on the course. And I was a little bit, I suppose you could say, a little bit skeptical about it, because I knew that the idea of assertiveness training came from behavioral psychology. And I was rather skeptical about behavioral psychology because in those days, especially, and in the early days, it was very much what I would call very fatalistic, very mechanistic. It said basically people are like animals, you know, we can be trained. We can be given carrots and sticks, we can be given rewards and punishment, and then we'll react accordingly. And it's true that a part of us is an animal and we do respond to treats and to punishment and so on. But there is a big difference between human beings and animals in the sense that we have free will and we have the ability to reflect consciously on our experiences, even if only the conscious mind is maybe only 1 to 5% and the rest is running on programmed responses. In that way, we are more like animals, I guess. But when I did the course myself, I found it was really, I guess, an eye-opener for me, because it made me realize, you know what? We have a choice about conditioning ourselves. We have a choice about what we think, about what we focus on, about our self-talk, how we talk to ourselves. And suppose I could actually change my behavior, my own conditioning, because I want to be different in various ways. So those of us that got engaged with the course, and I really enjoyed it. I went on to actually become a trainer, and then I was involved in a group that we had called CAT, which stood for the Confidence and Assertiveness Trainers Forum. It was based in London, but we had people all over the UK. And every month we used to meet and we used to discuss topics. We used to discuss and share techniques and ideas. And then for a couple of years, I was actually an advisory lecturer to the inspectorate of what was called then the Inner London Education Authority. And my remit was to look at adult education as well as the youth service and say, how can we start bringing in some of these courses and trainings to the education system so that people can develop more confidence, more self-esteem. It was part of a whole, came under the remit of an equal opportunities project, if you like, to enable people who came from different backgrounds, different minority groups in some cases, women, people who generally were not doing the best out of society in their employment prospects and so on. And so it's gone on from there. And now I actually teach assertiveness not only to my individual clients, which I still see a few, not that many, because most of my time is spent in training other people to do what we do. But I train the people that work and train with us as therapists and coaches, because often they really need this themselves to boost their own confidence and self-esteem and to be able to use to share with their clients. And the thing that I think about therapy and coaching and counseling and all of these jobs where people help other people to be empowered and do better, personally, I feel that you should walk the talk. I think if you're going to help other people to be more confident and to have higher self-esteem, to communicate more effectively, you should be able to model that in your own life so that you're not coming up and being all shy and nervous or being all bossy, and encouraging other people to be assertive in their own way. So that's my professional background, if you like. I've run the Institute as a co-founder of Transformations Institute for many years. And the last couple of months, while we've been in the lockdown, we've been running some events in association with Illuminations, who some of you I'm sure will know, and perhaps already their clients. In private life, I have raised a family. I've been a working mum, grandmum, and I'm actually a great-grandmother now. And so I've been delighted to see how over the generations that have come from my family, how several of my family members, including especially one of my daughters, I would say all to some extent, but one in particular, and then my granddaughter, and then my great-grandchildren are actually far more confident and have far more self-esteem and the ability to express themselves and feel okay about themselves as a result of what they've learned, that they've learned before. So these things don't only come into your work if you walk the talk, but they come into your private life and how you relate to your children and to your families, as well as to your colleagues if you're in the workplace. So I think that's enough about me right now. So what I'd like to ask you, first of all, whoever wants to go first, as many of you, I'm going to invite you to say to you, okay, why did you take the time and trouble to register and come and join us this evening? What are you looking for when you think about the words assertiveness, confidence, and self-esteem? And also any ideas you've got about what it means to be assertive, because a lot of people get confused between assertiveness and being aggressive, and they're very different things. So who'd like to share first what they'd like to get out of our session this evening?
Hi Leila, this is Siddharth here. If you don't mind, I can go forward.
Go ahead.
Hi, this is Siddharth here. I've been in the UAE for like almost 19 years now. And basically, I just got an email regarding this information. And a lot of times, due to the nature of my work that's more into sales and business development, product management, etc., I do kind of get a bit aggressive in my sales approach or in my business development. Because when I tried being a little bit empathetic and maybe in some cases even assertive, I found that it showed me as a weak person.
Okay. So in your
And
mind, there is an association, especially in the world of business and the corporate sector, that an aggressive person is the one who gets the deals done, who signs off on the deals, who gets the business, basically. And
yeah,
that,
you feel like you're more in control of what you're doing, and rather than somebody else controlling you. One is that. Being empathetic is good, but sometimes it opens the doors for you. But then the moment you try to be someone who you are not, everything falls apart. That's one of the key thing.
yeah,
And as
I
as I
think
said, being in the
that's
business
certainly
and
true. I think what you're saying is certainly true, that you need to be authentic, whatever your role is. You know, once upon
absolutely,
a time, and it was a very long time ago, we moved house and there'd been a big storm, a big hurricane in the UK, and it did big damage to many, many buildings. And at the time I was freelancing. And so I hadn't built a new client base. We'd left a center. We were running a center in London at the time. And so I thought, okay, I better earn some money now. And there was an advert in the paper they wanted someone to go around selling directly to leads in the interior design for kitchens in particular. So I thought, okay, I'll give this a go just as a temporary measure. And I'd never done anything like that before. So I went along and they did this sales training, and it was full of stuff that nowadays I personally think is absolutely awful. And and I say this as someone who's become to be quite an expert in what works in terms of communication. So one of the things they taught us was all buyers are liars. And they also told us whatever we did, we mustn't leave that person's house, because we would go to their house and do a session with them, measure up and everything. And we couldn't leave until we got them to sign on the bottom line. And if they didn't sign, if they didn't commit, then we lost that lead, and the manager or someone else would go in and close that deal. And so the very first family that I went out to see, I could tell, I just knew immediately that they were going to buy and that they trusted me, but they were the sort of people that wanted to just think things over and not rush into something. And so the guy that, they send you out with someone with you to make sure you do what you're supposed to do. And he was nudging me and going, do you know we were there until nearly midnight? These poor people were exhausted. And he's like pushing to me, get them to sign. And I said, you know what? I'm not going to do it, because I know these people are going to actually buy, but they don't want to be bullied into it. And so in the end, there was no sale. And in fact, they went back and they did manage to sell to these people. I didn't get anything because I hadn't sold them. I hadn't pushed them. And it was a very useful exercise for me to realize. Of course, I didn't last. I just did the course, then went out. That was it. I didn't go out anymore, because I thought I never want to sell anybody anything that they don't really want and that they don't feel pleased that they bought at the end of it. So they say in sales that, what you want is repeat business. You don't just want a one-off buy. And so I think you're absolutely right about empathy, but at the same time, that doesn't mean being a wimp. And some people think empathy and being, just kind of being a nice person is nice, but it doesn't get you the sales. But on the other hand, I have to say, people who are very aggressive, people who are very pushy, who want to be in control all the time, they actually lose at least as many sales as they gain. And what they don't get is repeat business, because people feel bullied. And when people feel bullied, you know, people are usually okay with bullies because people are a bit nervous of bullies. They don't want to get hurt. But the bullies, are they liked? No, they're not liked.
No.
As soon as the bully loses their power, they lose their control, then immediately nobody wants to know. Because again,
Absolutely.
when it comes down to animals, I talked about carrots and sticks. One of the things about communication and learning about communication is that it needs to come from within. If people are motivated, you can encourage, of course, you can use language. And if you haven't done NLP, I would recommend you think about NLP as a salesperson, because NLP is brilliant in selling. But what it does is it actually uses the right kind of language to engage that person. It uses the kind of language that gets the person feeling that you're on their side, that you understand what they want. You're using the kinds of language, for example, if they're very visual, if they talk about what they like to see, then you talk in visual language. If it's about their feelings, you talk in feeling language. If it's about what they hear, what they talk to themselves about, then use that kind of language. So there are ways to obviously build rapport to be a better salesperson. But back to the assertiveness model, if you do that and override the person's actual wishes, then it's not a good feeling. It's not a good sense. And if you they buy something from you, they go away, they're not going to recommend you to other people. They'll just be like, oh, I've been sold something I didn't really want. And that's not the basis for good communication if you want to be assertive. But it's different from being a wimp. It's certainly not being a pushover, which I'll talk about the difference in the models shortly. So thank you for that great point that you made there, Siddharth. Anybody else like to say anything about their idea about what it means to be assertive, and how that goes maybe with confidence and self-esteem? You don't want long silences. Come on, somebody chip in and tell me why you came on this. You're all here for a reason, obviously, unless you've just... Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, Nada. Actually, yes, I received this letter this afternoon as the last chance to register. I haven't seen it before, and I thought it's interesting. I manage a restaurant, and I have like around 100 employees. So, big part of whatever was mentioned on the newsletter is something I deal with my day-to-day life, with my guests, with my team, coaching and counseling. Sometimes, as you have mentioned, you have to walk the talk, and sometimes you have to say the no. Although, you're human, and sometimes the business, it pushes you not to be as human as you would like to be, and you feel guilty about it. But then you shouldn't, show that you're guilty because you're managing those people. So I thought it's interesting, and this is why I'm here.
Good, great. Well, it's a very good reason for doing that, for improving your relations and your communications with your staff and with a large number of people, all of whom are going to have their own personalities. Because this is one of the things that I found that, people say to me sometimes when I tell them the range of what we've done, and we have done an awful lot of broad range of things, both in the corporate sector, in government, in private, in education, etc. But I say, everything we do is basically applied positive psychology, all the same understandings. If you understand the human mind, what makes people tick, what sort of personality types people have, how they communicate, then you have a head start whatever field that you're in. Because building relationships and communicating is the key to me to everything if you're going to be successful in life. Sometimes you might make more money by having a certain style, but you might not. And as I said, there's the longer term issue. Sometimes things might not go so well financially, and yet because you've got a good group of people, you've got trust, you've got connection with people, then you're far more likely to be able to pick yourself up and start all over again. We had a student last year who actually had this is his words, 3 failed businesses in just 1 to 2 years. And he's a really nice guy, but what he hadn't learned was how to actually meet commitments. So he would overpromise people because he didn't like saying no, but then it was far worse because he said too many yeses and then couldn't deliver, and then everybody was annoyed with him and on his case, and his businesses failed one after another. And so one of the things that he was learning was we would refer to. There is actually a guy who's an ex-Navy SEAL, and he talks about extreme ownership. You own your problems, you take responsibility for them, you don't blame other people, and you don't try and shirk out of them, but you also don't take on things that you know that you can't deliver on just because you want to be nice, because that will backfire, always backfire on you in the end, and then, you know, everybody hates you. You're nobody's friend. Yeah, I've always respected the bosses I've had, and I've tried to be that way when I've been in senior management roles, in mostly in my case in education or in our own business. I was a governor once of a college in the UK, and we had a principal there, was a new principal, and I really respected her a lot. And they were having a lot of financial problems. The previous principal had run the college badly, and it was, you know, they'd lost a lot of money. It wasn't doing well. And so even though you get public funding, you still have to make the budgets balance at the end of the day. And he hadn't done that very well. And she knew that there would be cutbacks, there would have to be tightening of belts, there would have to be some redundancies. And instead of just saying to everyone, yeah, it's going to be fine, there'll be no difference, no change, she actually sat the staff down and said, look, you need to know there's going to be some challenges, some difficulties. We are going to lose some people. And it's a question of how we can best pull together. And those of you who are willing to go the extra mile to make this work, then eventually it will come together. But we can't carry anyone who's just going to be complaining, somebody else ought to do something, management ought to do something about it. And actually she retained all the best people there. And some people did go, some took early retirement or whatever it was. But actually, the people that she lost were people that were not really on side. You know, they'd already kind of switched off, and they were just taking their salary and doing the absolute minimum. And we couldn't afford to have those sorts of people on board. So thank you very much for sharing that, Mother. Anybody else got any reason why they want to get some understanding about assertiveness and confidence?
Well, can I take the lead right now?
Please do.
Okay,
Please do.
So yeah, the reason I joined this session was a long time back, you had a session in Holiday Inn. And since that time, I've been searching a lot about NLP, and I was in contact with one of your students as well, Miss Juanita, and I was taking hypnosis sessions from her. So you have given me a certain path. So I really enjoy and excelling it. Well, apart from that, assertiveness and communication skills. So assertiveness, I'll just explain it in my way. I'm an interior designer, and confidence in a person makes the clients satisfied. Like when I am taking a role or a lead to design their home, they are like trusting me. Okay, so if I'm assertive and I'm confident and bold on my design, on my selections and choices, it's giving them a positivity, and it's giving them a hold on the design. So I feel, and also law of manifestation says that you have to be confident that you are going to get something positive and you know, in your life. So this is what I have to say. Maybe I'm a little bit nervous because it's really glad to see you again. Yeah.
Well, I'm glad that you're here, and there's absolutely nothing to be nervous of. The great thing about being online is you don't even have to say goodbye and walk out the door. You can just switch off if you're bored or something doesn't suit you. Oh, I'm sorry, I lost my connection. You can get rid of that person easily. So I'm glad that you came along before, and I'm glad that you've had some sessions with one of our students as a practice client, and that's great. And I think the point that it is Ramesh, am I saying it correctly, or are you Fatima?
You can simply say Fatma.
Fatima, okay, so because it says Ramesh Fatima the way it comes up, but I thought,
yeah,
well, Fatima's
it's Ramesh and Fatima, yeah.
Yeah, okay. So what Fatima's talking about, I think, is absolutely right, because if you say to somebody, yeah, I think this will be good, and you have no genuine, as we say in the world of therapy and psychology, we talk about congruence. It means, does what you say with your words match your body language? Does it match what you're actually thinking and feeling? And the thing about people is, we're not just at that level of superficiality. We might be unconscious of it some of the time, but we get that. When someone says, yes, I'm really sure, but they kind of, their shoulders twitching and they're not looking very confident and they say it with a wobble in their voice, immediately, it doesn't matter what words they say, you don't believe them. If they tell you, oh yes, that's right, you look really great in that. Yeah, you look fantastic. Well, immediately we know that's a big fat lie, right? Because they're not looking sincere at all. So a lot of this goes on unconsciously. One of the things you do when you study assertiveness and do assertiveness training is you start to become more conscious, more aware of what perhaps you just naturally do, but without reflecting on it. And also not what just you do, but what other people do. Sure. Because very often people, they don't even realize that they're being dishonest, or if they do, they're kind of just trying to cover it up. And it's not about spotting them in a lie detection, that's another course, but it's about actually trying to find ways where you can relate genuinely as a human being. Like you could come to me and do me a pitch for an interior.
Oh, okay.
If I don't like it, and it might be your baby and you might be very enthusiastic, but if I don't like it, there's no point you trying to push it, even if you're very enthusiastic, because you'll see the signs, oh, I don't really like those colors, or that's not really me. And then I may, again, if I'm a wussy person, if I'm a doormat, which I'm going to talk about in a minute, if I'm the sort of person that just goes along as a pleaser, as soon as you're out the door, I'm not having her. Did you see those colors? Oh no, I didn't like it. And if you're not watching me and you're only confident about yourself, which is great to be confident about yourself, as you know, you might go, yay, yay, got a sale, and then you never hear anymore, and you wonder why that is. Because it's that balance between, and this is one of the major differences between assertiveness and being aggressive or pushy, is that we're not only concerned with putting across our message, which is very important, obviously, that we do that, but also we're respecting the rights and the opinions of the other person as well. Sometimes we have to agree to disagree. Sometimes it's not a good match. And personally, I don't know about you, I'd rather not have a student come on a course that's not happy, because if they're not happy, then that's gonna leak into the course. They're gonna be difficult. And I've had a few like that, you know, it's awkward, the whole group gets uncomfortable, and then other people are coming and saying, why are they being so critical? I don't understand, and I don't feel comfortable either. So much better to work with people that want to work with you. And I know, you know, if you're selling ice creams or widgets or something, it's maybe not so crucial to have the personal connection. But at some level in any kind of organization, it's my belief that actually that personal contact will make the big difference. And when there's a match, my goodness, then you will actually get your niche. And, you know, they talk in sales and marketing about your niche or even your micro niche. Again, if you have your right niche, those people love you. They are your true fans. They will recommend you. They will come back to you, whether they come immediately or later. And it's been our experience, weathering recessions and all the rest of it, that when you're in business, either as an entrepreneur or you work, but your job is to actually bring in business, even if you're within a bigger organization, then being sincere, being congruent, and actually respecting the rights and needs of others is equally as important as expressing your own viewpoint. So I think you're absolutely right. If you don't have passion, people will feel that. If you're just going through the motions, people get that too. But at the same time, if you let your passions carry you away and you're too enthusiastic, and I can share personally, one of the things when I was younger and I'd first qualified, and I was a single mum for a while, so I was having to work even when I would like to have had more time with my kids maybe. So I did a postgrad in teaching, so I could teach for a while, and I went out to interviews. Now, I discovered there's a problem. I'm very good at being persuasive and talking to people and put on, you know, the outgoing personality, being engaging. The problem was I was being, just about every job I went for, I was being offered. And the problem then was I knew that I'd sold myself to these people, but it wasn't a job I really wanted. And then I found, oh, that's also awkward, because you've got to say, no, sorry, I've changed my mind, or I don't want to come. And I know people who've actually ended up in jobs they've really hated because they've got good at selling themselves in interviews, but then they didn't actually really want that job. And so again, it's about being clear about what you want. And in the world of assertiveness training, one of the things that's really important is that you do have this self-esteem, this confidence, you are clear about your values. And in that, the two-day course that we do look at what are your intentions and values. there is what we call, I can even scroll down and show it to you here. We have what we call a bill of assertive rights. So we have the things that aren't assertive behavior. Just scrolling down to say, you can see that the manual is very much like a workbook, so it's very practical. So we have some typical limiting beliefs and attitudes that many people have. And then we look at the Bill of Rights. We look at the assertive behaviors of what constitutes an assertive Bill of Rights. And as you can see there, I hope, I have the right to state my own needs and to set my own priorities, the right to express my own feelings and opinions. I have the right to say yes or no. I have the right to make mistakes, the right to change my mind. And again, people feel awkward about that. Oh, I did say I do. Yeah, but you have the right to change your mind if you realize it's the wrong thing. Would you, if you were driving along a road where you had a map and the GPS was saying go straight ahead, and you can see that the road comes to an end? I'll give you a practical example. We were in Naples once, many years ago. My husband and I were driving with one of our daughters and her friend. And in Naples, it may have changed, but then it was pretty rough. So we're driving along the ring road, and the map says, go ahead, just keep going around the ring road, and then you'll get to where you're going. And as we're driving along, suddenly we could see ahead, the road just stopped. They'd not finished building it. Now, so if you don't change your mind, what are you going to do? Come off the end of the motorway and probably die in the process. So you have the right to change your mind, and there may be very good reasons for doing so. You have the right to say, I don't understand, because who can understand everything? And if you don't say, I don't understand, people will assume you do, and then it gets worse, right? Because you're sitting there, yeah, I understand. And then someone says, well, okay, so go and do that. And you go, oh, I don't know what I'm supposed to be doing. I don't have a clue. So saying, I don't understand, please, could you explain that to me again, is not a sign of weakness. It's a sign of someone just being realistic and needing to get more information. If we come down here to say, I don't agree, that again is something where people say, well, what if my boss, I say, I don't agree, they're going to fire me? Again, there are ways and ways of saying that. And you don't have to be tactless in order to be assertive, but you do have to stand your ground and be prepared to know what your bottom line is. You know that saying, there are some battles that are worth fighting for and others that aren't, so you have to actually decide to choose your battles carefully. I've discovered over the course of life that you don't put the same amount of energy into some small thing as you do into something that's really important to you. I have the right to ask for what I want. That's something a lot of people don't realize that they have the right to do, to ask for what they want. But guess what? And I think, I'm sorry to say this because there are probably more ladies listening now than there are men. But I think women particularly, obviously partly because of the way we're conditioned and everything, we have a tendency to say things like, well, if you don't know what I want, then I'm not going to tell you. You should know what I want. It's obvious, isn't it? It should be clear to you what I'm expecting. And then, of course, that's why you men get men saying, I have no clue, I don't understand women at all. Well, you should know. Yeah, but what if someone doesn't know? They don't understand. Best to just tell them. Tell them what you actually want. And being assertive means being willing and able to say, this is what I would like. Now, you may not get it. Somebody might not agree with you, but at least you've been realistic and honest about what it is that you do want, and not expected someone to do what we refer to as mind reading. Because mind reading is asking someone to do the impossible, right? They might have an idea about what you want, but they're not sure. And if they've got different ideas, different values, different personality from you, they haven't got a clue why it's such a big deal to you. I have the right to be treated with respect and dignity as an intelligent and capable person. Now, what I think about that is, in order to do that, you need to have the previous one, the right to believe in your own self-worth. If you don't think you're worth anything, if you think you're not, you're not that important, or your ideas or your opinions are rubbish, then how will you expect other people to treat you with respect or respect your ideas and opinions? So this all starts with you and how you value yourself before you start expecting other people to value. I have the right to refuse to take responsibility for other people's problems. That's another one. Some people are born rescuers. Oh, okay, let me sort that out for you. And guess what? A lot of people will say, yeah, sure, go ahead. And then you find yourself doing their job as well as your job. And then instead of saying thank you to you, they ask you to do something else as well. Or they walk away going, thanks, that's fine. And don't give you any credit for it. So it's important that you actually don't take responsibility for something that's someone else's issue, or if you agree to do something for someone, you tell them what you expect in return, or if you really don't expect anything, you know, like in the happiness advantage, which is something else we teach in positive psychology, the random act of kindness. If you do something for somebody out of kindness and compassion, don't get resentful if they don't turn around and thank you for it or appreciate it. Indeed, some of you with kids may know they'll turn around and say, I never even asked for it. I didn't ask to be born, some people will say. And true, they didn't. Or maybe they did and there's some spiritual perspective on it, but as far as they're concerned, they didn't ask you to give them life or to have them in the family. So again, it's important to respect other people's rights to have their opinions. You can see that it goes on this list. Here we have the bottom one. I have the right to be unassertive if I so choose. Sometimes you decide it's easier to go along with the situation because it's too time consuming or exhausting to get involved otherwise. It may be that someone's doing something really bad, and if you're just clear and direct and honest, they may take you out in some way or another. And so you might decide, if you're in an organization where some really terrible things are going on, I hope you never have the experience that I did once, where I was working in a college as the assistant director, and the director of that college was a crook. I actually discovered information. Not only was he a bully, which everybody knew, but he also was doing things that were illegal and to do with finances. And I didn't go up and confront him immediately. You've got your hand in the till, you're a thief, you're actually you know, you're defrauding money from the college. But what I did do was go and talk to the governors and what you might call a whistleblower. Because if I went and confronted him, he's just going to fire me, and then nobody's going to find out what's going on, or it might take longer. So I had to decide what's the best way to stop him doing what he's doing. So it wasn't in that case to go and be assertive directly to his face, right? But was to actually to work out what's the best strategy to deal with. If someone came to the door now of the apartment here that I'm in, and they had a gun, and they said, okay, is Phil in there? I'm looking for Phil. I'm going to lie. I'm not going to say, yeah, sure, come on in. You know, I'm going to say something like, oh no, he had to go out. Did you not see him downstairs? Or sorry, you can leave me a message. I'll tell you when he's back. Okay? Because in that case, a lie is much more right as a human behavior. Okay? It's a moral thing to do, rather than say, yes, I'm being assertive and honest and direct. He's in that room. You can go in there and shoot him if you want to. That's your choice. So you have the right not to be. And I say that because sometimes there are some situations where for legal reasons, you can't be honest completely or human. For example, if you are in a crash with a car and you know it was your fault, you were talking on the mobile, not paying attention, and you rammed the car in front of you. If you say, I'm really sorry, I should have been paying attention, I shouldn't have been talking on my mobile, if you admit liability, I don't know if you know this, your insurance will be null and void. Your insurance company won't pay out. Now, you might decide, I'm willing to do that for the moral ground, moral high ground, fine, that's your choice. But if you can't afford that and you need your insurance company to cover you, you do not admit liability for an accident, even if you believe that you were really responsible. So you always have the right, if you choose to be assertive or not. Does that make sense? Okay, good. So what I'd like to say about assertiveness is basically that it is the art of clear, direct, and honest communication. And what I also want to say is that it's not the same as being aggressive, which a lot of people think that it is. And I'm just going to go through a few things with you with regard to this. Okay, aggressive. People often say assertive when what they mean is aggressive. I'm going to get my way at all costs. I'm going to be assertive. You'll see sometimes in a job description, they say we're looking for an assertive salesperson or an assertive manager. What they mean is aggressive. Someone is going to go out there and sell, or get the people to do what they want them to do, okay? If you think of a continuum of behavior, of personality, you talked about, I think, Siddharth, about control. So a person that's aggressive wants to be in control, they want to win, and they don't care what other costs, okay, there are involved. At the other end of the spectrum of the passive, which is the next one along, you can probably see in that column there, this is what I call the doormat type. You know, the type of person Some of you might have relatives or friends like this. So just as an extreme example, you're all sitting in the room and then everyone decides to get up and go out and do something and they don't really feel like it. And then they're sitting there in the room and everyone walks out and they don't even remember that person sitting there. So quietly, not taking up any space. So they turn off the lights. And what does that person say? They say, that's okay. Just leave me sitting here in the dark. That's all right. Don't mind me. And personally, if you're one of those people, I'm sorry, but I feel like shaking that kind of person. Come on. Why are you just sitting there? Just taking anything at all. And I know people make jokes about Jewish mother-in-law. They make jokes about Muslim mothers-in-law, mothers in general. I'm talking about people who like to play a game of being poor them. So I'm not just talking about people who are passive in the sense of they're just a bit shy. I'm talking about people who almost make a career of being the one that's hard done by. And that can be a very powerful kind of passive. You know, the sort of person that never feels well, they always feel weak. What do other people do? What's the gain? In psychology, we refer to this as secondary gain. What does a person get out of it if they're always passive? If you say, where should we go to eat? I don't mind, you decide, you choose. What would you like for your birthday? Well, I don't mind, you decide. I don't really care about that. What are they essentially doing when they're not taking any kind of lead or any responsibility for telling what they want, what they think, or what they feel? What do they force other people to do? Anyone going to hazard a guess on that?
I guess it will be a
It can
victim.
be.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
I was just saying that the person becomes a victim, or he calls himself a victim.
Yeah, they begin to see themselves as a victim, hard done by, and of course other people see them as being a wimp, a walkover, and that's where you might get someone like the kind of person Siddhartha's maybe referring to, where they don't want to be assertive or pushy. They see that maybe being assertive is aggressive, so they'll say, I don't mind, you know, if you don't want to buy, that's okay, I understand. Then of course, who's going to buy from somebody like that? They've got no passion, no enthusiasm, no get up and go about them. And so sometimes the really, really rescuing type of people will look after them, but do they feel good about it? Do they feel good about having had to sort of make the choices, decide where you're going, make it all nice? How do they feel underneath the, yeah, that's okay? How do they feel underneath? You pulled a face there. I think, Siddhartha, you know how that feels. How does it feel when someone won't make the decisions and you have to do it and rescue them?
Hi. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Is that Maha?
Yes, hi. Sorry, I have a picture on. Thank you for a very interesting talk. I apologize, I'm not decently dressed, and that's a benefit of having a Zoom.
That's okay. You've just got us all imagining. You've got us all imagining now what you mean by indecently dressed. Okay.
No, I'm just in my sports outfit, and but I'm dressed. No, because I found out about this last minute. But I was going to say that the people who kind of let others make decisions on their behalf probably, obviously, would not feel good about having others make a decision for them. But like sometimes, what you said about being aggressive versus assertive, this is why I attended, because I wanted to know the difference. Because, for example, my partner is aggressive, and sometimes if he says, you gave a prime example, you said, like sometimes if he asks me where do you want to go for dinner or for lunch or like whatever, I'll just say, okay, you can decide. And then he'll say, why don't you give me a suggestion? And then I come up with the answer, well, you always decide anyway. So
so you're playing in with that, being a victim to his bully, right?
I wouldn't call him a bully. I would call him.
But that's I'm using extreme language to make the point, right? So if someone says, well, I don't know, And then they say, look, come on, you choose. And then instead of saying, okay, fine, I'd like to go to Nando's, or I'd like to go to Zuma or something. But if you say, well, does it matter because you're going to decide anyway, then you're buying into that same relationship, that game, aren't you? Well, you'll decide, so I'll just go along with it. And I'm thinking of it from the other person's point of view as well, which is that someone who won't make up their mind, who plays the victim, it can be very irritating. So after a bit, you might actually feel like quite frustrated with them. Even if you're a nice, kind person and not a bully type person, you might feel like, oh my God, why don't you ever make a decision? And builds up then, and this is my experience of what becomes really negative in relationships, resentment. And when someone resents something, they might not openly say, look, I'm not happy about this. I'm frustrated. You know, I don't like the way you're being about this. They just keep, okay, it's okay, it's okay. But then it leaks out in other ways. And when it leaks out in other ways, that can poison a relationship. And so often, as they say, it's not the big things that people sweat it over. It's the accumulation of many little things over time that eventually just becomes like, you know what, I can't be bothered. I just don't care anymore. The feelings start to get lost. So it's important if someone has a tendency to take over and be a bit bossy and a bit domineering, that if you're asked, for example, where would you like to go? And you say, and they say, no, I don't want to go there, that you then would stop as an assertive person and say, hang on a minute, you just asked me where I would like to go. And I told you this is where I'd like to go, and now you're telling me no. So why did you ask me in the first place what I wanted if you don't actually want to know? Can you see that that's very different in terms of you standing your ground than saying, well, you're going to decide anyway, so go ahead. Because one is telling the person, well, I'm just going to go along with you being the bully or taking charge all the time. The other is saying, well, hang on a minute, I do have my opinions, but I'm challenging you now. Why do you ask my opinion if you're not going to listen to it anyway? That's actually an assertive response compared with the first one, which is just going along with it. Does that make sense, Maha?
Yeah, I actually answer exactly in the same way that you've, but it doesn't work.
Yeah, sometimes you need to be persistent, and obviously you start with the easy ones, right? When you're developing assertiveness, you do not go up and start on your mom, your husband, or whoever it is that you have issues with, because that's asking for trouble, because you're so much caught up in a way of being that you need to get out of. So I always say, start with the small ones, start with the things that you find easier to do as you boost your confidence and get stronger, and then you start to tackle the ones that are bigger. And also there are lots of great techniques for. There's one we call fogging, which is basically someone criticizes you or nags at you, and you just agree with anything that's true in what they say, but you don't agree with the stuff that you don't agree with. You don't agree. And it's very difficult for them to get hold of you and actually try and get a rise out of you, because often that's what people are looking for. They're getting some energy from the conflict. And so if you don't feel like playing that game, there are lots of ways to avoid doing that. So we've talked about aggressive and we've talked about passive. What we haven't talked about is what some people call indirect, or some people call passive aggressive. Now that's sometimes a little trickier, because it's obvious someone's going, do this or do that, or I want to be in control, I want to win, I'm going to stamp all over anybody that gets in my way. That's pretty obvious, right? And then there's the passive person that doesn't mind, you do what you like, walk all over me, I'm not going to complain, the victim. But there's also those people where they don't want to appear to be in control, or appear to be nasty, or appear to be wanting to win. So what they do is use indirect ways of putting across their desire to win, often in ways that gets other people involved to do their dirty work for them. So for example, you might say to me, what do you think of this? Do you think I look good in this dress, for example? And you say, well, you know, yeah, you know, it's okay, it's a pretty good choice. What do you think? What do you think, Fatma? What do you think she looks like in that dress? I mean, you know, now everything in me is telling you that I don't approve of your choice. I don't like what you look like, but I'm not going to say that to you. I'm just going to make it obvious. And if possible, I'm going to get Fatma to say, you know what, because I know she has a good sense of style, she's a designer, and she'll, no, really, I think it'd be better if you went for another color. And then I can go, that's right. I got Fatima to do the job for me instead. They use sarcasm. Oh, you know, here comes the waiter with my meal, it's taken ages to bring it and serve it. So rather than say, okay, thank you, straightforwardly, or, you know, I'd just like to say that did take quite a long time, and just want you to know it was very slow to be served, or to be passive and just go, so that's okay. But also there's the sort that goes, well, take your time, no rush, Speedy Gonzales. Oh, did something happen on the way back from the kitchen? You know, sarcasm, just digging without actually saying openly. That for some people can be even more of a wind up than the person who's straightforwardly aggressive. At least you know where you stand with the aggressive person, but with this manipulative, indirect person, often you don't know. And they may even say to your face, yeah, everything's great. And then behind your back, they say to other people, they whisper, they gossip. A lot of people find them perhaps the hardest people to deal with because you don't really know where they stand. You don't really know where you are with them. So those are the three that we put in the first column there. You can see, sorry, in the second, third, and fourth ones there. But the first one, the assertive, the one that's in lilac, if I just roll that up a bit. So the assertive person is someone who is not on that spectrum from aggressive to passive. They've stood off that spectrum altogether, and they've said, you know what? I have clear values. I have my own opinions. I have high self-esteem and confidence. I respect other people as well. So I'll stand up for my rights without hurting or violating other people, but I do believe I have the right to express my own opinions. The passive person, well, I won't say anything. If I do so, it'll be in an apologetic way. I don't want to upset anybody. If I'm directly aggressive, I'll just say them whatever they are. I don't care the consequences. Don't care if it hurts you or not. I just want to get my own way. I'm in control. And then, as I said, the manipulative, indirect person. Now, if you look at what the basic message that goes under that, this is what I think, this is how I feel, this is how I see the situation, is a straightforward, assertive response. It's direct, it's honest, and it's clear. A passive person, well, you can take advantage of me. My feelings don't matter as much as other people's. As someone said quite rightly, I'm a victim. The best I can hope is that you will look after me and take responsibility for me. And we might, at the extreme, call that a very clingy person. You know, if you've got children, it's the one that will stay and hold on to mom, won't go in and join with the others, will want to be protected by parents or the big siblings and so on, and won't take a stand for themselves. And so they don't develop confidence, they don't develop self-esteem. Now, some people might say, is the direct aggressive one not got lots of esteem and confidence because they're, you know, they know what they want and they think they can get it? No, I don't think that's personally the same thing as confidence, because if you're really confident in yourself, why do you need to bully other people? Why do you need other people to even agree with you if you're so confident? So I think a lot of times under the bully, the person who needs to control is actually a lot of fear. The fear that maybe they're not really in control. The fear that maybe if things change, then that's going to be a threat to them. The fear that other people are good at what they do, that could be a challenge to them in their top dog role. So you'll often find that, and you find this as a therapist, it's very interesting that people who come with phobias, I mean, I don't just mean they're a bit nervous and so on, but major phobias or anxieties, huge stress levels, high blood pressure. These are often people who've got the warrior style of personality. They seem to be, you know, like they're in control of it, but actually they're terrified of losing control. And if they do, for example, if they're made redundant, I've had clients like this, they can get into a deep depression. They can fall apart because they're so used to being in control, so used to being the top dog, that when they then get made redundant or perhaps they retire, and there's some very interesting statistics on this, by the way, that people who've been in senior management roles often have a short life expectancy after they die if they don't have a good family network, interests outside of the workplace, because their whole identity has been caught up in being the boss, being in control, having the status, and when that's not there anymore, they can feel lost. They can feel they've lost their sense of purpose. So I've worked with some people like that, made redundant before they were expecting to. And in this case, I'm thinking one in particular right now, the wife actually practically dragged him along for therapy because they're not the first people who want to admit that there's anything wrong, or that they're anxious, or that they don't like to talk about emotions. But she brought him along. She said he's falling apart. He's having a breakdown because he'd been made redundant as a senior pilot because he'd got ear problems. He had tinnitus and his hearing had got worse. And of course, pilots have to have really good vision and really good hearing. So they told him he was going to be made redundant. And so he just completely lost all his confidence, all his everything just fell apart because that was his role. He was in charge. He was the top dog. He was the pilot. So the the manipulative type with their basic message, as I said, they want to be in control, but they don't want you to know that they want to be in control. So they're going to play games. They're going to manipulate. And to say, some people call that passive aggressive. Now, if we look at, just going to scroll down, their behavior in the crisis. Person who's assertive will evaluate the situation and take action, and they'll take responsibility. If they need to lead, they will. If they've got someone else there who's leading well, they'll follow them. They don't have their ego needs running the show all the time. The person who's passive will either run away or give in. They're the classic victim of the bully. The bully loves them. They'll hand over their sweets in the playground. They'll give up their seat to someone who insists that they want to sit there. They'll cooperate with whoever is in charge, and they won't be very happy, but they wouldn't stand their ground over it. And so, of course, as I said, they're the ideal victim for the bully. The warrior, the bully, the aggressive type will rebel or attack. And they'll even say sometimes, I like a good fight. They'll enjoy being competitive, and they want to win at all costs. They don't understand people like me who are not competitive in that sense. I'll compete against myself. In other words, I'm my own, I set my own values and I want to do the best that I can do, but I'm not really interested in, when they try and motivate you in a team by winning prizes, going for gold, all that sporting metaphors. I'm not really moved by that because that doesn't really bother me to compete. Now, some people are competitive, they like to compete, and I'm not saying there's anything wrong with competition as long as they can be a good loser. As long as if they don't win the game, they actually think about, what could I learn from the person who win and I didn't. In other words, they're reflecting on their performance, not, I didn't win, I'm going to get that person, you wait till next time. They're driven, they're eaten up from inside if they don't get what they want all the time, and that's not healthy. As I said, they tend to suffer from high blood pressure and stress levels and be prone to heart attacks and all that good stuff, or not good stuff. If they don't manage their anger. So the rebel or attack, not to be open about it, but find someone else to blame. It wasn't me, it was this one. So if you have two kids in and say, who started this? It was them, not it was me, I started it. Or actually, it wasn't quite like that. It happened this way, but he did it, she did it. They want to blame the other person. And so that's not, again, a very healthy position in terms of winning friends and influencing people in the long term. If you look at the effect on other people, generally, and this applies to what you were saying before, Siddharth, we respect each other and are able to share feedback. If you actually put across the merits of your product, you're assertive about selling what it's good for and why you think it would benefit that person, and they still say no, then you say, okay, fine. You might even say, would you mind telling me why it is that you don't want this product? Or why did you decide to go with the other guys? And I found that, say, with senior management jobs. I told you I always used to get jobs really easily when I was younger, but when you go up the ladder and it gets to be more competition, you're up against people who are obviously also very good at playing the game. I would always ask for feedback if I didn't get a job or something that I wanted. Can you tell me what I could have done differently, how I could have done better, or maybe I wasn't the person you were looking for? I'd like to be informed. Now, they don't always tell you, or they don't always give you an honest answer, but if they have a good HR department or director, they'll give you feedback which will be very useful to you. And this is part, again, we go into the course on receiving and giving feedback that's both critical feedback, so-called negative feedback, and positive feedback. Now, critical feedback doesn't need to be negative. Of course, some people do give it in a horrible, nasty way, but getting feedback that tells you what you could have done better or differently is actually really valuable. And also, people are nervous about, they don't want to look like they're sucking up to people or asking for flattery. And so they won't say, if someone says you did that really well, they won't say, how exactly did I do it well? Could you give me a bit of feedback on what you liked about that report, or that design that I did, or that piece of teamwork that I managed to pull together? Because again, you want to know, not to get more compliments or flattery, but because you want to know what did you do well and what could have been improved. Now, I personally hold school responsible for the fact that people don't do this well. School puts so much emphasis on winning and losing, on failure, and I believe, and this goes along with being a teacher, a trainer in NLP, neuro-linguistic programming, because we have as one of our 8 prepropositions about life is we don't have failure, we have feedback. To us, failure is the bad F word, not the swear word. You learn from doing, you learn from attempting things, trial and error. That's how you get to learn. If you were a baby, do you ever know, have you ever seen a baby that finally got it, pulled itself up, thought it got the balance right, took a first step and fell over, who sat down and went, that's it, I'm not going to walk, I'm never going to walk again because I look stupid, I failed, everybody will laugh at me? Of course not. They get up and they try again and again and again, and they experiment until they get the balance right. That's how life should be. But we get so, in school, we get such an emphasis on coming top, being a topper, winning, getting the grades, not about what we've learned. And there's been a lot of good educational research in universities on this, about what we need to do is give feedback to kids in ways that encourages them specifically on what they do well, and doesn't even just give them global praise, because that actually doesn't develop what Professor Carol Dweck calls a growth mindset. So the people who are obviously the victims, the passive people, well, people don't respect them, and also sometimes people feel guilty about them, and so people don't like feeling guilty about somebody else. The aggressive type, people feel humiliated, they feel defensive, they don't like that person around. As I said, bullies are rarely popular, and when the bully loses their power, everyone tends to turn on them or walk away. They don't get many friends left at the end of it if they lose their power, if they lose their control. The manipulators, the passive aggressive, the indirect sorts, people get confused and feel manipulated, and they don't quite know how to handle them, and they go, but that's not my fault, because they don't want to take any responsibility. So what's the goal of these different styles? Well, the assertive person wants a win-win situation, preferably that everybody gets some of what they want, and they're prepared to negotiate and compromise if that means that everyone can get at least some of what they want. Now, I'm not saying always, sometimes there are things you won't compromise on, really deeply held values, but most things in life, there's a compromise to be had. There's some kind of way that we can find something that everybody gets something of what they want and wants to play fair and treat other people with respect as well. The passive person just wants to avoid conflict. They want to appease and avoid the conflict, and they don't want to take responsibility either. So they'll often pass that on to the bully, or be the person who wants to win. And as I said, an extreme bully, an open warrior type, will actually do whatever it is to win, no matter what the cost. The indirect or passive aggressive, they want to win, but not to be seen to do so. As I said, they don't want to be seen as competitive, but in fact they are, but just they do it very deviously and not openly. So these different types of, we can all say, well, we all do bits of these, that's true, but most of us tend to have one of those 3 styles under stress. And the goal of an assertiveness course is to boost confidence and self-esteem. It's to get people to actually start to think about what it is that they value in themselves, and also to start unraveling and getting to grips with those things that we refer to as unassertive negative beliefs. We refer to them as specific negative beliefs. And those really come down to things like, I'm not good enough, I'm never really going to win. And often they're family stories as well, like we succeed but then we lose everything. Oh, we're never going to be the lucky ones, we're never going to be the winners. Or it might be men are only after one thing, and so surprise, surprise, that's all we get, that's all we see in things. So that whole, I know it can be simplistic, but that idea of the law of attraction, that idea of expecting and getting what we are expecting, is very powerful in human beings, because the law of attraction is basically based on the idea that we have selective thinking, and whatever we're focusing on, that's what we see. You know, you get a new car and you didn't see many of them before, and it was a particular model that you liked or a color that you liked, and you only saw a few of them. You get one and suddenly you see them all over the place, right? We tend to screen out, delete, or filter the things that we don't really want to know about or are not interested in. We see the things we focus on. So if you focus on every time that anybody wasn't very nice to you, or the negative responses you've had from people, or the things where you didn't get it right very quickly, it took you some time, and then you look at what you actually did right, what you did well, etc., you'll often find that the story you tell yourself is not logical. It's not actually rational at all, but it's the story you've told yourself to the point that your subconscious mind has accepted that's how you are, and then it just does it for you. And that's the whole basis of the law of attraction, is that we go around experiencing things often that we don't want to, because we programmed ourselves to believe that's what we deserve, that's what we're going to get. And so, surprise, surprise, that's what our subconscious mind does for us. So the assertiveness goal is to actually start to make some of that unconscious mind more conscious, to start working with it. And I always like to say to my students, whichever of the disciplines they're studying with us, get your conscious and your subconscious mind to work together as a team, and you'll achieve a great deal more. So if you start to create a vision of yourself as being assertive, whatever that means to you, then you can start to get what it is that you need to do to change. I once was running a course, and this was, by the way, for people who'd already trained as therapists, so they were doing advanced training. They were not newbies or beginners. There was one lady in the course, and she was a really nice person, seemed very easygoing, gentle person, very respectful to others, nice personality, good sense of humor. And we did an exercise one time in this course that we're talking about now, when we actually were doing the course, and it involved looking at negative self-talk and our negative beliefs and thoughts that we run about ourselves. And after she'd done that exercise, she was sitting back in the whole group. They'd done group, work in small groups and pairs, and she said, you know what, I want to share something. She said, I cannot believe, I would not tolerate anybody saying to me the things that I have just realized I say to myself over and over in my mind. The insults I give myself, the way I undermine myself, the way I sabotage myself, it's incredible. That goes on in my mind. If anybody spoke to me like that, even though I'm pretty easygoing, she said, I wouldn't tolerate it. I wouldn't let my husband speak to me like that. I wouldn't let my friends speak to me like that. I wouldn't let my boss speak to me like that. And yet that is how I talk to myself. So we do quite a bit of uncovering of what are your, I call them your crumple buttons, your areas where somebody just says something, maybe even an innocent comment, and it's like somebody went and just stabbed you right through the heart. You just feel yourself collapsing. You might put a job of putting a front on it, but it actually really hurt you. You went away thinking about it, repeating it to yourself. It may have been just a throwaway comment to them, but it was an area of you having sensitivity, you having an area that's still not really grown up. You're still a little child in that area. So it's important for an assertive person to be honest with themselves about where their sensitivities are, and start to learn how to, what I call, desensitize those crumple buttons, so that instead of reacting as if it's a trigger that's made you go the moment someone touches it, you're able to just relax, to breathe, to notice how you're feeling, to not get triggered by it, and to go on as an adult, healthy adult human being, rather than as a little child who's just been devastated because you had a pet toy, maybe a teddy or something, and it fell out of the car while you were driving along and you couldn't go back for it, and now you're completely devastated and you have a big tantrum. But we behave like that sometimes as grown-ups, right? So when you learn to be more assertive, you're constantly kind of observing yourself, not to be picky with yourself, but just to notice how you are. And as I said, choose your battles wisely. You don't go, if you've got a difficult relationship with your mum or with your husband or your boss, you don't go steaming in there. For one thing, if you go in and said, I've changed and I'm going to do this in this way, it's like a red rag to a bull to someone who's been playing the game where you've been the victim and they've been the bully, or the other way around. They will test you out. So it's best to feel that you've developed some confidence and some competence before you start testing it out on the people who know exactly how to wind you up, exactly how to, you know, to push those buttons of yours, because anyone who knows someone well and who lives with them, shares their life or their office with them, has a pretty good idea of what winds that person up. So it's important that you, as I said, choose your battles wisely and practice with people who are going to be more supportive to you in actually, you know, noticing what games you're playing. So these are the sorts of areas that assertiveness training deals with. Obviously, we've talked about increasing confidence and self-esteem. And I have to say also that you can be any type of personality and be assertive. I want to make it clear that you don't suddenly turn into, I was quite an introverted, shy, reserved sort of person, and now suddenly I'm out there, Ms. Assertive, you know? No, it's not like that. You can be quietly assertive. Someone might be very bouncy and out there and Tigger-like. If you think of Winnie the Pooh, you know, bouncing all around the place, they're not going to suddenly become, yes, very laid back. And no, of course, but they will take more of a breath. They might count a few heartbeats before they jump in immediately and always have the first thing to say in a group conversation. And so each person, whatever their personality, can become more assertive because, as I said, it comes from inner confidence, inner sense of self, inner sense of self-worth, and then being clear about how you express yourself. Some of the things it's really good for doing is standing your ground when someone's trying to push you into doing something you don't want to do. So saying no, and then you have to add this bit without feeling guilty. Because some people will go, okay, I have to say no, and they do say no, but then they say, I feel so terrible, I feel so guilty. So you need to learn to be able to say no without feeling guilty. And of course, you don't focus on the no. And I had to learn this myself after years of practice assertiveness training. I felt very embarrassed when I understood more about neuroscience, because if you keep saying no, 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 it weakens you, because no is a word that switches everything off. So when you say no, the first thing to do is to say, no, I don't want to do that. What I do want to do is, and then you talk about the yes. You talk about what you do want, what you will do, and that gives you power. If you just keep going, no, 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 no. I mean, I've done this many times. You can come up to someone saying no, and you can give them a little push, and they will fall, they will stumble. You can push down on their arm and get them to say no, and immediately their arm will go down. Get them to say yes, put the same or more pressure on, they won't yield. And that's because, again, the subconscious mind recognizes trigger words, right? So no is a switch off word. Yes is a tick box, a plus word. Something else that you need to do when you're being assertive, and this is quite a big lesson for people, is to stop saying you, your fault, you did this to me, I don't like what you're doing. What we do in assertiveness is own. Remember I said earlier, this concept of extreme ownership, taking responsibility. So you start with I statements. So it doesn't mean that you can't say, you know, say someone promised that they would do something for you, and you did some things for them, and they promised to do something for you, and then they don't do them. Now, being assertive doesn't mean going and going, you didn't do this for me. You could do that if you like, but guess how they're going to react? If you say to someone, you didn't do that, and you, as we know, is accompanied by this kind of a blaming, whether it's actually pointing the finger or blaming in your tone, how do people respond? How do you respond if someone says, you didn't do that? How do you react? You get defensive? You start to say, well, you didn't do it last week when I asked you to do such and such. Do you start counter-accusing them? So, right, when you blame, when you say you, it invokes a defensive response, and the other person isn't listening to you anymore. They're busy defending themselves. They're putting up their own walls to protect themselves. So in assertiveness, there's a big emphasis on making I statements, especially when you're giving negative feedback or asking for something you want from someone and you're not sure if they want to give it to you. So, for example, in that example I just gave you, you might say something like, I'm feeling unhappy, or I'm feeling frustrated about the fact that You promised to do X, Y, Z, and you didn't do it. I don't feel very happy about that. I don't feel comfortable about that. What have you just done? When you've said, I don't feel that, or I'm not happy about that. What have you done? Someone like to give me some feedback on that? You can unmute yourself to tell me.
You make the person in front of you feel like guilty about what they made and recognize that, you know, like actually they were at wrong. And, you know, it will push them to maybe apologize and promise that they will deliver.
Yeah, and they may or they may not, but the point is you haven't attacked them, right?
Yeah.
You have owned your own feelings. You have said, this is how I feel. So they've listened. They're much more likely to listen then and hear what you're feeling. And then, as you said, if they're a reasonable person, which many people are, they may well say, okay, it's true, I didn't do what I'd said. There is a reason though, and then they might start going into all sorts of explanations. You might or might not choose. I wouldn't just jump straight in, let them explain a bit. You could say, look, I understand you have your reasons. However, you didn't tell me that you weren't going to do it. You didn't give me the option. And so therefore, I was left not knowing, just simply knowing you didn't do it. So then you could move that on by saying, in future, if something genuinely gets in the way of you doing something that you said you'll do, will you agree to let me know that at least I know that you're not going to do it and I'm not counting on you to do it? Can you see how you're going to move towards a resolution, find a compromise or a solution to this issue if you're looking for that? If you just say, and you just say that you didn't do that, and they say, well, no, I didn't, but I was very busy. And you go, yeah, but that's not okay because it left me in the da-da-da-da-da. There's already a conflict, there's disagreement, then they may well drag in something that you didn't do previously, and it gets much harder. So another rule in assertiveness is one thing at a time. So if someone says, yeah, but you didn't do so-and-so, then you can say, that may well be the case, so we can talk about that separately, but let's not just roll everything in together. Okay, so sorry about that, folks. I don't know, it's one of those Zoom things where it just froze. Sometimes it freezes and then it unfreezes itself, but it just stayed completely frozen, and we were all frozen. Interesting expressions on our faces. So I think I was talking about I statements and taking responsibility, and that if you used a statement that talked about I think, I feel, what I'd like is, and then you state your position without blaming, without judging, without pointing the finger at the other person, you're far more likely to actually get a constructive response from that person. Now, of course, there are people who won't cooperate, who are not interested, they just want to win, and the best you can do with those people is to stand your ground and keep your self-esteem intact for yourself. They're not looking for a compromise, they're not looking for a solution, and if that's the case, there's no point in attempting to do that with them. That's what I would say about that. But you can assume that many people will actually want to play the game with you, and they would much rather have a better way of communicating and relating with you. And as I said, with couples, with people who know each other very well, with families, the difficulty is in stepping into these ritual responses. And so it's really good sometimes to just step out of that. And if you are going to change the way that you're behaving, for example, with a spouse, or with a child or children, it's important that you do sit down, but at a neutral time, not when they're in the middle of a row or something, to say, you know, there's a few things I'd like to change about whatever it might be. And having family meetings, having regular discussions, that aren't precipitated by crises are a really good way of actually starting to introduce more assertiveness principles into the way that people relate to each other. Now, there are quite a few things that we do on the course when we do the full course. As I said, we look at dealing with criticism, giving and receiving criticism, both constructive, positive feedback and also critical feedback. Dealing with anger, because that's something that people sometimes have great difficulty in dealing with their own and sometimes other people's anger. So there are strategies that we discuss for that. And there are a number of, as I said, very practical things. We do role plays and we get engaged in situations. I have some examples to give, but also people have their own examples of some situation they were in. And then sometimes you can replay it yourself, perhaps trying some different strategies out, using some different assertiveness techniques, or it may be that you want someone to play you so that you can watch how you might have done it differently yourself. And it's quite useful to find out which particular types of communication style and personality wind you up so that you can be aware of that. Like I said earlier, I don't like it when people are sarcastic or indirect, but for me, someone who's totally passive, totally plays the victim, that's the sort of person that winds me up more. So you need to think about who for you actually is the one that's going to trigger you, that's going to fire off your responses so that you get out of being assertive with them, so that you can step back into being assertive again and think about different responses that you could come up with. So anybody got any specific examples or questions that they would like to raise at this stage? Because I'm open to talking about your particular examples. I can also run through a few more things that we cover when we do the course in depth. So who would like to share something, whether it's someone that's already shared or somebody that hasn't yet? Please do feel free to chip in.
Hi, Leila. May I speak? I'm Shilpa here.
Please do, Shilpa. Go ahead.
Okay. I'm a lawyer, Leila, by profession. And I also write articles very similar to what you're talking about. So whatever you've been saying has been like music to my ears. It totally resonates with me, your law of attraction and assertiveness. So assertiveness is definitely a part of my job because I have to imbibe confidence when I'm talking to my clients. But one thing which is a total no-no for me is actually aggressive people. So I think many times people are confused where assertiveness suddenly becomes aggressiveness. There's a fine line, like sometimes between confidence and overconfidence. So I would be stating,
personally, I would not really accept the idea of overconfidence unless we're talking about someone who says, you know what, I could fly a plane, and they've got no training in it. Then obviously, clearly, that's overconfidence. Or gets in a car and says, I can drive a car, and they've never been trained. But in terms of people's general sense of confidence, I don't think being overconfident equates to aggression. Because remember when we talked about the core values, I think that's the important part to look at. If someone's coming at a situation and then they start to behave as if the other person doesn't matter, doesn't count, doesn't have value, actually, if we're going to weigh the scales, they weigh less than you, they're less of importance than you are much more important than they are, then that's going into the field of aggression. And of course, if we think about what aggression is and what passivity is in terms of the biological drivers, it all comes down to the stress response. And that's why I said, look at people's behavior under stress. A stress response is, in terms of nature, is designed for a good reason to protect us from death, basically, right? It's there to protect us, to enable us to survive. So there is a natural trigger emotionally in our emotional database that kicks off the autonomic nervous system response, the ones that you can't control consciously. They happen in a flash of a second. So if something that triggers us brings on that stress response, and it is something that threatens our survival, then we're going to either stay frozen, which occasionally is the best thing to do if faced with a predator particularly, or it's going to mean the flight or fight, right? So the flight response is fear, and that's where all the blood, all the energy goes into the lower extremities, and you're off. And the adrenaline and the noradrenaline and the cortisol that you get give you a huge amount of strength to do things that sometimes people say was super, I don't know how I did that, absolutely superhuman. So that's the fear response. And the other, the aggressive, the anger response, is basically biologically designed to actually turn around and fight off that predator, often for protective reasons, to protect the young, to get something out of your way that's preventing you from achieving a goal that you really need to achieve. Now, that's all very well when it comes to primitive instincts and primitive lifestyle. But when we think about modern life, when you're there either in the courtroom or in your office giving advice to a client or dealing with arguments, okay, somebody might say something that winds you up, something that's unnecessary or insulting or whatever. And so the problem is that the flight or fight response is a very primitive response, and it triggers, and actually it's completely inappropriate for that situation, because the flight or fight response is designed for you to punch out, get out that thing that's the obstacle that's in your way, or to run away and escape from it. But you're not going to turn around and slap your client. You're not going to punch them, hopefully not anyway, otherwise you'll need a lawyer yourself. You're not going to run out the door because you go, oh no, my God, I can't stand this other person. So what we then do is we stuff it, right? We override that basic instinct, and the problem is then we're in conflict. We're in psychology, we'd call that cognitive dissonance, right? You've got one idea and then you've got another idea. You've got one feeling and you've got another feeling. So what we need to do, and again, assertiveness very much goes with positive psychology and self-management and mindfulness in this way, is to start to get very mindful to notice those triggers, the things that wind us up, that get us, so that then we can do whatever we do, whatever positive psychology practices we use to actually defuse that automatic stress response. Because the research shows, in terms of endocrinology, if we can make an intervention within 15 to 20 seconds of the stress response being triggered, then we can actually calm down. We can prevent going into that refractory period where the emotion just keeps recycling, so that even then someone has said, oh, I'm sorry, I made a mistake, I didn't mean to say that or do that. But once we've been triggered, if we don't manage our response, then we still keep on being angry, still keep on being frustrated and so on, even they've maybe even apologized. So I think that fine line is when you start to notice the heart beating faster, you feel the anger, you feel those fists coming up, you feel the defense response, all that, then you take a breath up. And personally, I think that breathing is the first thing to do in this situation. Yeah. And also I teach people a technique called the stop technique. So they just say stop, take a deep breath in, and then relax the face, around the eyes, all the little muscles around the eyes, the jaw, neck, the shoulders that have come up to be defensive, the arms, the fingers, the hands. Take that breath and relax. Take another deep breath. Relax this time down the front and back of the body, all the way down the legs to the feet and the ground. And of course, that's where the fear response is going to be. And then I have them imagine that there's a great big magnet or a vacuum right under their feet that goes and just draws away from them any tension, any tightness, whether it's anger, whether it's fear, whether it's a disturbing thought or trigger. And then just focus for a moment. And you can really do this in a matter of seconds once you train yourself on something that you do like, something you enjoy, something that makes you feel good. Maybe it's your favorite child or grandchild, or in my case, great-grandchild, or you think of a beautiful place that you like to be, you think of a color that pleases you, you just think of something very relaxing. You maybe just imagine a throbbing heart or a butterfly wings, whatever does it for you. And then when you've taken that breath and you look at that person, disassociate from the trigger, and you realize that's that person, that's their issue. When someone is being annoying, obnoxious, rude, overly passive, whatever, it's their issue, it's not yours. So if you can stay disassociated, and as you as a lawyer, as you know, need to really keep your wits about you, you need to use that 1 to 5% of your conscious mind, the logic, the reason, you need to keep that switched on. So you need to manage that other 95 to 99% that can get triggered by the emotion. And when you do that regularly, it's my experience, like with the stop technique, once you do it repeatedly and regularly, like a little pattern interrupt, as we call it in NLP, or a brain break, it's like, you know, like when my system froze, I realized that thank you, Fatima, yep, many techniques that are really, really useful. Fatima's just shared about Paul McKenna, and a technique that he teaches. There are many. I like to go for the most simple techniques, and as I said, the stop technique, I've adapted it a bit over the years from when I first learned something similar. Things that work really quickly for people, that put them into a state where they don't just go down that emotional timeline and recycle, because that's very exhausting and draining, and it means you don't really see things clearly as you are. In fact, in the happiness research, one of the things that's interesting is they found that actually being primed for happiness means that your eyes process visual information more clearly and accurately, so you're actually more visually, your perception is clearer. So it's actually doing that bit where you stop. If you notice, it's an aggressive response, because assertiveness is not emotional. You may have emotion and then be assertive about how you express that emotion, but assertiveness is simply a way of expressing yourself. As I said, go back to the basics: clear, honest, and respectful communication, where you're putting across the facts as best as you can. And something else I'd like to add, if I may here, is something that we emphasize a lot in the assertiveness model is core statement. You know, many people will say they're not happy. They've had perhaps poor service. And then they'll say, I wasn't happy about the service. This service was not well made. And then something else, and then something else. And then the person will say, well, we were very busy. And they go, well, you may be very busy, but da 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 da. And then they lose their way and they don't stick to the core statement. It's sometimes referred to as a broken record. So when you say, that's as may be, I understand you're busy, and I haven't got the goods that I ordered, whatever it might be. Say your core statement is, I want my money back. You haven't given me the goods that I've ordered. So if your core statement is, I want my money back, you just keep coming back to that, and you don't let yourself get dragged and sucked off into other things. And again, I'm sure you see this in your profession in the law. People will give excuses, they'll distract, they'll say this happened, that happened. And if you don't stick to the actual core statement, to the broken record of, yes, but let's say, I'm not saying you're a criminal lawyer, but okay, where were you on the night of the 25th at 8 o'clock? Oh, well, always on a Wednesday night, I do so and so and so and so. Yes. And where were you on the night of the 25th at 8 o'clock? You keep coming back to that same thing, and then the person can't go running off all over the place. And if they introduce argumentative bait, like, oh, well, it's not fair to give me a hard time because I'm very busy lately and I'm just stressing out about everything. I understand that. You don't have to go like a robot, just repeating it. Say, I understand that. I can understand you're very busy. And I need to know, when did you hand that report in, because it's not on my desk, or I need that report in by 5 o'clock this evening. I understand you're busy, but you have to give this priority. And I need that report in by 5 o'clock this evening. It's the repeating of the core statement actually has a very powerful effect on getting the neural pathways focused, and the person gets the message also, you mean business, you're not just going to give up. Does that help to answer your question?
Absolutely. In fact, you know, what I wanted to add over here, Leila, was that I find handling my professional relationships much easier than the family ones. Well, what happens is, you know, probably, like, see, you laughed already, so you kind of understand what I'm talking about, is that where assertiveness becomes aggression, because they're older than you and they speak with so much of authority, and I'm telling you, and I've seen the world, and I have done that, and I'm talking for your benefit. I mean, you know, sometimes then I'm not being passive, but just for my peace of mind and sanity, I just say, okay. Because, you know, you want to stop it. You want to stop the argument.
Well, when it goes with either being passive and going along with it, or being aggressive and getting wound up by it, let's face it, again, going back to the stress response, it's much easier to take things out on the people that we love and that we care about, because we believe that they love us and they're going to accept us, right? We don't have nearly so much emotional engagement with the people in the office, the people that we work with, as we do with our family. And it's, unless there's something going on in the office that, you know, that maybe shouldn't be, mostly it's in the family that there's going to be love and caring and relationships. Also, what goes along with that is more emotion. And I can tell, I mean, I can speak from experience on this, it's much, much easier to be a grandmother, and even more to be a great grandmother, than it is to be a mother. Why? Because you don't take things so personally. You don't feel it's a reflection on you. It's not an extension or a projection of you, of living out your needs through your children, even though you don't consciously intend to do that. The more disassociated you are, the easier it is for the reason, for the objectivity, for the rational mind to kick in. So with families, yes, Sometimes we will be less assertive because maybe it's easier, but also I find that there needs to be what I call the bottom line. There needs to be, for each person, it's individual. And there's certain areas you'll say, yeah, okay, what's the point in upsetting them? They're old, they're a bit stuck in their ways. But there's also things where we go, you know what, that I'm not compromising on. And again, I can only say from the experience of myself and many colleagues and hundreds of thousands of clients and students, it actually makes a difference if you are very clear within yourself about your bottom line. Because I've known a lot of people, a lot of people who actually, yes, Fatima was mentioning stoicism, and what we would say in cognitive behavioral therapy, we would call it also Socratic approach, actually accepting that things are the way that they are, and the things you can change and things that you can't change. And as they say, the wisdom to know the difference between the two. But when you decide, this is my bottom line, this is where I actually have to make a stand, people generally respect that, especially if you're not fighting every battle, every corner, as I was saying earlier, but you choose the ones that are important to you, and those you don't just compromise on. They're really important to you. And I've often had it said to me, especially when we lived in Bahrain and I had a very busy private practice, I often had 2-3 months waiting list to see clients. And I've had people say to me, look, it's okay for you. You're a Western woman, you're educated in a certain way, you come from a certain culture, you don't understand my culture is this way or that way. And particularly women would say that to me, but also men in terms of the losing face, going against family members. And I'd say, you know what, the culture that I come from 100 or so years ago, very similar things we could say about being a woman or being in a certain position in society. Cultures change because people change, and people are willing to stand their ground about certain things. That's how change happens. I don't know if you've ever read the book Jonathan Livingston Seagull, but that's a lovely example of how it is that sometimes somebody says, you know what, I know this is the way people have always done things, but I want to do things differently. And you also need to be aware that that will get a reaction. Initially anyway, people will test to see if you mean it. I was asked the question, I'm just going to pop it up because it came up and then it's gone down again. Okay, is assertiveness a skill that you learn? And the answer is absolutely yes. It's an attitude, it's a model, it has certain core principles to it, but yes, it's a skill that you learn. You learn how? By practicing, as you do like any other human being. And here again is why psychology and neurology are now doing some brilliant things in the field of what we now call positive psychology. We're now finding that the things that those of us who've practiced positive psychology before it had that label, who've been humanistic in our approach and client-centered, but have also believed that people are capable of so much more than they realize, their resources are almost endless, actually by training those neural pathways to respond differently, by actually rehearsing something. As they say in psychology, we say it takes about 21 repetitions to build a simple habit, and that is true. Obviously, some habits are more complex, some behaviors are more complex, but if you practice doing something repeatedly, after a bit, it becomes second nature to you. And if I look back to where I was many years ago when I was much younger, yes, you could say, you know, you're still basically Leila, you have certain characteristics, you have a certain essence that's you. I'm not going to dispute that. But in terms of my behavior, my ability to communicate, how I communicate, the things that don't bother me, the things I'm able to manage and control, it's like I am a completely different person in many ways. That happened not because I was struck with it one morning, I woke up and had a revelation, but by daily practice over and over again of the things that I teach other people to do. I teach my students, I work with my clients. So yes, indeed, assertiveness is a skill that you learn, but it is based on certain principles. So if you don't share the principles that you should respect other people, if you don't share those kind of what we would call basic humanitarian principles, then you're not likely to take to assertiveness because you just want to win. But most people, in my experience, don't just want to win or don't just want to be victims. They actually want to have better relationships. They want to be respected. They want to be in a happy and loving and caring environment. And so it's very, very valuable. It goes along with, someone said about long-term peace of mind, especially in profession, absolutely. Anything at all where you would like to be using that left brain, that cognitive ABCD brilliant thing that makes us human, along with all your emotional drives, your imagination and everything, then assertiveness is a very useful skill to use. And it's something that goes with other things. That's why I mentioned law of attraction. We look at creating vision boards. We look at self-esteem. We look at using techniques from hypnotherapy, from NLP, from various things that we teach in their own right. Those can come into assertiveness and be very useful, which is why the techniques that a couple of people have mentioned and so on, absolutely. Anything at all that works for you to keep you into a resourceful state where you can recognize your emotions, but at the same time be congruent and respect the other person. If I'll throw another one into the mix. If anyone hasn't heard already of a person called Virginia Satir, she's one of the 3 therapists that NLP was based on, observing their work and the way that they worked with people. And Virginia Satir was basically the mother of what we now call modern family therapy. And all the work she did was about looking at both individuals and systems, and looking at the way the person is influenced by the family, by the society that they're in. And so as an assertive person, and if you're trained in assertiveness, it's really important to also look at the family situation, the cultural background. Having said that, back to what I said before, there's a point where it's important to stand as an individual, what Jung called individuation, what Maslow called self-actualization. There's a point at which you have to think, as a person, what's my purpose in life? What are my highest values in life? And if they don't match with your culture or those of your family, you can be respectful towards the culture, respectful towards the family, but you can say, you know what, those are your rules. To me, I'll take the ones that are useful as guidelines, but I'm not going to buy into rules which actually don't fit with me and don't fit with who I actually am. And that's how change happens, which is why assertiveness is often goes along with a change. As I said, I think it's important to be responsible and say other people may well react, they may well test you, families may well say, that's not how you always used to be. Let's see if we can prod you into behaving the way you did before, which is why family holidays, you know, in the culture I come from, Christmas, you get more calls to therapists after Christmas than just about any other time of year, because after a day or so of being with the family, people are getting suicidal, they're feeling crazy, they feel they've undone all the good years of self-development and maturity by just being back with their family and siblings for a while. So, you know, some people have lovely families and that's great, but sometimes people say to me, you know, my friends and my tribe, they're my family, my actual family. I love them because they're my family, but I don't like them very much. So I don't think there's any rules that come with the handbook for being human that say you need to like all your family, or you know, that you have to want to be with them all the time. You can love them, but again, just as you choose your battles carefully, choose your friends and the people that you mix with, because as they say, you'll tend to be in a mindset of the people that you surround yourself with. And if you work in an environment you don't like or don't enjoy, that's another thing that sometimes you need to look at as you start to become more assertive, because it goes along with self-reflection and self-esteem. And the higher self-esteem you have, the less you're likely to be able or be willing to put up with things that you don't enjoy, unless you're absolutely essential. Again, I understand if my kids are starving when they were younger and I was responsible for them, I'd probably do just about anything to feed them. But most of us don't live in that extreme most of the time. We have a lot of choices about what we do. Anybody else got anything, whether they've, I think I've answered the points that were made in the little chat boxes. Anybody else got anything they'd like to ask or raise?
Yes, please. Hi, Leila, can you hear me?
I can hear you. Who's speaking?
This is Izzat. How are you?
Hi. Good.
Thank you very much for this webinar. I'm going through transition within the same company I am in. I used to lead around 500 people regionally across MENA region, and now my job is more of a strategical, where I can handle a country, where I be the leader of the country, but not everybody in it will be reporting to me. Knowing myself from Gallup strength, my strongest trait I have and strength I have is relator. And I'm an activator, where I need to go details. It looks like a control or assertiveness, but I don't want to step on people's toes within the country and their leaders. How do I manage a country that where not everybody's reporting to me, but I need to keep the ecosystem at bay and productive without creating any tension? Knowing myself, I'm very assertive. I'm always customer facing team I have, but because I'm going through this transition, I need to adapt. But sometimes people may be a little bit more sensitive, either from their superior or for the people that I'm leading their weekly team meeting. How do I, going through this transition, and I want to make sure it's successful. I don't want to control, but I want to make sure this model that I'm handling is not over, it's not going to backfire. I want the country to develop. I want it to open new market and so on, without stepping on each with their leaders or with them, not to create the sensitivity, especially, with COVID and people worried about their jobs and so on. So people are more protective, especially talking in the Middle East. So I don't know. And knowing myself, I'm aggressive and assertive. And
well, aggressive, I don't know if you were here for the beginning, but I did make it clear there's a big difference between aggressive and assertive. Assertiveness is not on that spectrum from aggression through to passivity. It's a different place altogether. So if you're saying you have a tendency to be aggressive, that's one thing. Being assertive is not the same as being aggressive. The first thing I'd say to you, and I'm not saying this facetiously, is that I think you should seriously consider getting yourself a coach. I'm not trying to sell my services. I occasionally take on clients, but mostly I focus on the training other people to do what we do. But I would actually find myself a coach that would support me, because clearly I can say a few words now, and I'll do my best to say a few things that might be useful. But if you're in if you're in a situation where you've got a new big challenge, it's not something you've done before, that's the whole purpose of coaching, is to actually build on your strengths and build your potential by removing the basic coaching equation is performance equals potential minus interference. So you've identified what some of those interferences might be, that you're used to leading in a different context, that you're used to working with a different culture maybe, you're taking on a different role. So all of those things could be interferences for you from you manifesting your potential as a leader. And again, I don't know what kind of training you've done. Sounds like you've had some psychometric personality assessments, and I'm trained in those as well. I have to say, I think they're very useful. They can be spookily accurate sometimes, but also I have long-standing arguments with clinical psychologists who say to me, that's how you are, these things don't change, they're fixed, because I don't believe that. I don't believe it's true that human beings don't change. And if I look at my own psychometric profile, for example, the Myers-Briggs test, my psychometric profile changed completely. And it wasn't down to brain damage. It was 10 years in being in roles where I had to take on completely different roles and behaviors. And so I started behaving differently. And because we've got these amazing neural pathways that adapt and adjust, I started changing a lot in my behavior and my attitudes. So I would say, get yourself someone who can work with you on what's going to be the best situational leadership for you. As you know, leadership is a one word, but it means many different things. So it may be, for example, in the country that you're, or different countries, each one might be different that you're talking about, that you might need to find out what the strengths are in that country. And it may be they're sufficient to keep them going, and you make minimal input, and you find out who are the key influences in that country, and you feed them and get them to do the work of leadership. It may be in others that they want somebody to lead from the front and to be out there and to make the rah-rah speeches and get them enthused and engaged and willing to follow you into battle. So I think it's about, as I said, looking at your role strategically, as it is a strategic role, looking at yourself, your own strengths and your own challenges, and getting someone to work with you who's experienced is a good coach and is able to use, I would recommend someone who can use NLP skills, who can actually work at the level of the unconscious, coaching the unconscious mind, not just the little bit that's conscious, and help you to work through what are the best strategies for you to use, because they may be different in different places. I know when we lived in Bahrain, the whole culture, in many ways, superficially, you could say, oh, well, that's just like Dubai, it's the Middle East. It isn't. It was very, very different. Strategies we used for marketing, for advertising, for the way we delivered what we do were very different in Bahrain than they were when we came to Dubai. And that's just a 1-hour flight, right? When we've worked in Saudi, it's been different again. In Qatar, different again. So I think it's important that you look at the role that you've got and your targets and your core goals that you have, and then look at what makes up the jigsaw puzzle that makes up your role and what you need to do, and what each one might need as a strategy that you can then pull together to make the jigsaw as complete as possible, but accepting that each part might need different handling, and that you can be as much as possible the kind of leader that I always think the leadership roles I've had, I've aspired to the the old Chinese Taoist system of saying that the greater the leader, the one that when they leave, the people said we did it ourselves. But sometimes in order for them to say that, you needed to lead them from the front, sometimes from the back, sometimes by letting other people appear to lead when actually you were the boss, but who cares? It's not your ego needs that's important, it's whether the job gets done. So as I've said, in a short time that I have, I can't give you the solutions to your challenges, but I can give you some advice or guidance, if you like, about how to get someone to work alongside you. Somebody who as a coach doesn't have any vested interest. So that's not a line management relationship. It's no one in the company, but someone who's able, who has good strategic skills and is good with working with people and building their strengths so that you can actually apply the skills that you've got and adapt some of those things that have worked for you in a different context in the new situation. I don't know if that's helpful to you, is that?
Yeah, it's good. No, I mean, to be honest, I am doing what you are telling me, and but I just want to listen how other people of your expertise and maybe other colleagues listening up. I mean, it's good to hear how others that you don't have vested interest, as you said, how would they handle? I think I'm handling it well, and you hit it on the nail that each country has its definitely different culture, different emotion, and what have you, and you need to adapt and you need to go through the learning curve.
Yeah, and again, your context is so important. I'll give you a little brief story. When I went, I was the first female dean at the University of Bath, which for those who don't know, it's one of the modern generation of universities, but very much modelled itself on Oxbridge and the Research University. So it was very small, but it was very focused on research and quite snooty, quite quite exclusive and went for prestige in many ways. I was quite an odd choice to put in there, but I also understood and later understood it was probably a very good choice for the then Vice Chancellor to do. And the Vice Chancellor was vital in that particular organisation. He was a very, very powerful, very smart guy, very creative, a massive ego. He was American, and he probably would have made a great politician if he'd gone into politics in America. But when I saw him and how he operated and how different he was from what I'd experienced previously, I actually went and I talked to the only other woman. She wasn't a dean, she wasn't at a senior level in the organisation, but she actually reported directly to him, and she was the director of PR. And so as she was a direct report and she was a woman, I sort of took her aside one day. I think there'd been some kind of social event, and I said, just tell me, how do you actually find, you obviously get on fine with David and he seems to respect you, and how do you handle him? And she said, I like you enough to be honest. And she said, I'll tell you. She said, you've seen how he is. He's actually very supportive to women, and you're the first female dean that's been appointed here. And she said, he's cultivated quite a few women, but also on the outside, he's very much a typical sort of, looks at women in a certain way, behaves a certain way. She said, what I find is that if I make the most, I might bat my eyelashes occasionally. She said, but I do my job very well. And she said, but when I give him a report or a series of recommendations or a strategy that he needs to sign off on, I deliberately make a small mistake or leave something out, not anything important that would make me look like a fool or that he would disrespect me, but something where he can say, you know what, you could put this in, or you could improve it by doing that. And she said, and I deliberately don't put that in so that he can have the pleasure of putting me right, of supporting me, and just feeling his ego has been stroked at the same time. Now, that's not an assertive strategy, I have to say, but I wasn't working in an assertive environment. I was working in a very male environment, lots of engineering and science at Bath, not a place for the arts and all that. I changed a bit of that. And so I said, okay, thanks for that. I'll try that out. and it worked absolutely brilliantly as a strategy. So I did that, and it was one of those occasions when I was talking earlier, I don't know if you were around, about the Assertive Bill of Rights, and the last thing on that bill is to say I have the right to choose to be unassertive. In that particular situation, the way in which I presented the information to get policies and so on accepted was to use a strategy that would work around somebody's ego, in this case, who had the power to get things done very quickly, and it worked as a strategy, so I did it quite deliberately, and it didn't, it served me very well as a strategy. So I'm saying in every situation, you have to make your choices about what's important. In that case, I wanted the university to substantially improve its performance on the student satisfaction front, on the facilities and support services for students, and things that had let it down where it was very high scoring in other ways. So as I said, it depends on what the goals are, and the strategies can be adapted. It didn't make me feel like I wasn't a person who could assert herself, but it made me think politically, strategically, it was better to do things in another way than just come and be completely assertive, straightforward, honest and clear in my communication, because that would not have worked his ego the way that it needed to work in the situation that he was in. So yeah, situational and adaptive and flexible, and accepting that your ego needs go second to what you want to achieve, if what you want to do is to achieve things, rather than to have your ego stroked, which this particular guy did need his ego stroked, but it was worth stroking his ego because he was very, very successful and very creative, and it was worth it. So anybody else got anything? We're just coming up to the end of our time. So if anyone's got a burning question or observation, please give it to me now. And we can give a few more minutes, because we did go off for a few minutes while I froze. Anyone got anything they'd like to raise right now?
Yes. Hi, Leila again. It's Maha.
Hi.
Just quickly, I always read about emotional intelligence, and is this at all linked to emotional intelligence, being assertive?
Absolutely. And again, you're I don't know, maybe you're asking the wrong person, because I also teach emotional intelligence. We ran Paul Ekman's first lead license delivery center. I'm a lead trainer in emotional intelligence, in reading people, in the science of truth and lies and all that. So naturally what I do does bring it to it. But even if I didn't, I would say that anything that's about understanding and relating and communicating more effectively with other people, building relationships that are constructive and lasting, all of that could be said to be emotional intelligence. We get different things now. We have the what's it called, the PQ, the positivity quotient. We have IQ, we have EQ, we have all of that. To me, all the things that I do, the simple way that I describe them is applied positive psychology. It's how do you use the human mind and behavior? How do you work with that to achieve things that actually makes people happier, more successful, more fulfilled, and lets them have better lives? So to me, if you're going to have successful relationships, whether it's at work or at home, whether you're going to feel good about the person you are when you fall asleep at night or wake up in the morning, all of those things involve both your intellect and your emotions. And we all know that your emotions are going to win in any argument between intellect and emotion. That's why we need to get them harnessed together, because emotional responses are run by your autonomic nervous system, which, as I said, takes up a vast majority of your brain functioning. So if you don't have that working along with your conscious objectives, then you're constantly going to be frustrated and not going to get what you want. But yes, emotional intelligence, understanding emotions, what triggers emotions, what is the timeline of an emotion, refractory periods, what are the universal human emotions, how we show them on our faces, all of that comes into the mix. When I'm training people as therapists, I bring in a lot of these things, because that's a longer training. Obviously, if you only have a couple of days, you focus on a particular thing. So we might run sometimes an EQ training and focus on those things. In NLP, that's a longer training, so we can bring in some of the body language stuff from EQ into that. In the assertiveness, I don't tend to focus on body language, facial expression so much, other than to be congruent. So if you want to be assertive, you do not do lots of passive gestures or aggressive gestures or avoidance, withdrawal type of gestures. You do things that actually build rapport. So it's useful to do things that build rapport when you're looking at asserting yourself. But most people who come on assertiveness courses, other than the ones who want to be better therapists and coaches, are ones who want to either change their responses because they know that they tend to come across aggressive. Very often it's because they feel that they're passive, that they don't really state what they want. So we always adapt. We have core material, but we always adapt it to the group that we have, and it's very interactive. So this is, you know, the way that we're doing this as a webinar is not the way that I would be doing it as a course online. There will be breakout rooms, there'll be people working together. It's one of the courses that I actually much prefer to do in person if we're in a position to do that, because it's really good for people to actually have face-to-face interaction. I know we're all having to learn with online, and I'm getting more comfortable with that, but there are certain things to do with the work that we do where I have to say actually physically being present with somebody would be by far my choice when it comes to having the most effective and personal human interaction and training. But as I said, we're getting good at doing it online, and hopefully we'll continue to get better. So I hope that's answered your question for now.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, great. So unless anybody's got anything burning question right now, I just need to end by saying we have a core curriculum. If anyone hasn't already seen it, if you've come through Illuminations, you may not have seen it. If you've come through us directly on our mailing list, you'll have seen I've actually listed what we cover on the 2-day course. If you want that list, if you like, of the curriculum, then I'm happily arrange for that to be sent to you. Anyone who's thinking of doing the actual course, the 2-day intensive, which is not this weekend but next weekend, then you can book that. If you've come through Illuminations, you book through them. If you're one of the people on our mailing list, then obviously you come direct to us. But we are running that course. It's a module of an advanced training for people who are already trained as therapists, but it's a freestanding module, so it's very useful for people to come along for their personal and or professional development. And we have people who are coaches or working in the field, or they just want to improve their skills, and it's interactive enough that it really doesn't matter. You don't have to have particular qualifications apart from being able to read and speak in English, because that's the medium of teaching. So if anyone wants to know more about that, as I said, if you come through Illuminations, then you can find out more through them, and if you come directly through us, then as I said, please get in touch with me if you want to. So anybody got anything else before we wrap up for tonight? Okay, so I think what we'll do, I mentioned it before, but it's a nice thing to do to have closure, that we do something together. And Fatima mentioned the havening technique, but I'll stick with the stop technique for now because it's nice and simple and quick. And I mentioned it earlier, so let's just do that together. Anybody who's got to go offline, totally understand, and thanks very much for coming. Those who've got a couple of minutes, and that's all it takes, we can just end by doing a stop technique together. Before I do it, I'd just like to say to you, don't wait until you get stressed to do this. Do it every hour or two throughout the day. Set your phone with a nice little, not an annoying alarm, but one that's a nice sound, and just stop what you're doing. And imagine that it's just like rebooting your computer when it froze, or getting the Zoom to come back on as I did when it freezes. When you're multitasking and you've just got which is the biggest lie that was ever perpetrated, it's a terrible way to learn or get business done. When everything is rushing around, there's no depth to your creativity. Alpha and theta, those are the brainwaves we want to come up with new ideas and to be creative. And you can't do that when you're massively multitasking and everything's draining your batteries, so to speak. So it doesn't take long to do at all, but you can do this technique regularly, and you'll find after a bit it just becomes a natural thing to do, and you'll find automatically that you start to do it to de-stress yourself before you get into the refractory mode where the stress is now rolling down a path that's very hard to pull it back once it's got to that stage. So I'll model it for you, and you can do it for yourselves. If you're muted, that's fine. If your videos are on or off, entirely up to you, because I'm going to have my eye closed while I do this too. So if you just like to lend me your imagination for a moment, just close your eyes down and say to yourself in your mind immediately, quite forcefully, the word stop, and then take a deep breath in. And as you breathe out, relax all around your eyes, face, your jaw, down into your neck and shoulders, arms and hands and fingertips, and just allow that feeling of relaxation to spread through the upper part of your body. And then take another deep breath in. And this time as you breathe out, relax down the front and back, all the way down through your legs, past your knees and ankles, right the way down to your feet and your toes. And then just imagine underneath your feet, underneath the soles of your feet, there's a great big vacuum or magnet that just goes and draws out of you any tension or tightness, any bothersome thoughts, any physical or mental tension at all. Just let it flow out through the soles of your feet. And then just spend a few moments now, just quietly in your own time, breathing in your own rhythm, and think about anything at all that gives you a good feeling. That might be someone you love, something you enjoy doing, a face of someone that you feel very, very fond of, that maybe makes you laugh or gives you a warm feeling in your heart. It might be a color, it might be some musical sound, anything at all. And if you want to be relaxed, obviously think of something relaxing that chills you out. Then if you want to feel energized and get a bit of boost of energy towards the end of the evening, then you can do that. Whatever it is that you want to focus on now that brings a good feeling to your heart and maybe even a smile to your face. And then just before we come back into the room, because we just have a few more moments, sometimes in the daytime or in your office you might not do this, but as we're here now just privately, before you open your eyes, just bring your hands together and rub them together. Just rub those palms together vigorously so you can feel the warmth, feel friction creating warmth in your palms, and put them over your eyes so that you can just allow your eyes in a moment to come back gradually and gently into the light of the room, and take a deep breath. You can open your eyes, have a little stretch if you need to, and that's all from me. And I'd like to just say goodbye to everybody now, and thank you for attending, giving me your attention, whether or not you join us next weekend or for another webinar. And I'm sure we'll be in touch somewhere along the way. And those of you like who're starting new jobs and got new ventures going on for you, good luck with those. So bye-bye for now, and I'll close in a moment after I've just read a couple of comments that I've got, and then I'll close the meeting, but please feel free to go whenever you need to. Okay, so I'm just going to go offline now. Thank you for those who've sent their thanks and appreciations, and those of you who are going to practice the stop technique, that's great. And do keep an eye out for other webinars that we're doing, and we'll keep you in touch. I like to give practical techniques as much as possible. So if you can make the stop technique work, there'll be other things as well in the pipeline. So keep in touch, and more later. So once again, thanks for all who've been online. And I'll be closing the meeting now. Thanks again.